Hello, I'm Sean Peche, Festival Manager for the Sled Music and Arts Festival. Welcome to Rebooting the Music Mainframe. It's a free online symposium that we're presenting with our friends at Byta. They're the platform for sending digital audio files and streams. Before we start, I'd like to thank our funders, Factor, the Government of Canada and Canada's private radio broadcasters, and the Canada Council for the Arts. I want to say that also a big thank you. We started working on this, I don't even know how long ago, but we had no idea what to expect from it. But we've been pretty overwhelmed this week with what I think has been a pretty good success. We've had over 500 registrants to this symposium, which definitely exceeded our expectations. So wherever you're watching it, whether you're watching it now, whether you're watching it later, thank you so much for tuning in. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We will have the chat enabled, so feel free to, from home, throw your questions into the chat, and I will do my best to make sure we cover any questions you may have. Getting to tonight, this is our last panel, and we thought it was an appropriate one to end on. It's called Enacting Change. And the reason why we thought this was a perfect way to end the week is we've been exploring various issues in the changing musical landscape, from working with AI to create music that's more accessible to make, to the problems with algorithms and the internal biases they have, to digital music archives, and on and on and on, minimum pay for artists, etc. And it constantly, every single panel has some real issues that need changing in this music industry. And we thought it would be great to end with one that hopefully is a little bit inspiring in terms of people actually taking the time to try and change this industry. From a more personal kind of viewpoint on why enacting change was really important to us is the Sled Island Music and Arts Festival. We've gone 2 years where we haven't run the festival as normal. The pandemic has obviously changed a lot. And we're a festival that normally tries to be thoughtful and tries to keep up with the need for change, but often finds ourselves unable to, just the grind of doing another festival and immediately working. And this was 1 year where, or the last couple of years was the first time where we really had time to kind of like take a step back and look at what we were doing and try and reevaluate some things. And so we're in the process of changing a lot with our own festival. And so we thought it would be really inspiring to hear from other people who have had successes, hit roadblocks, been working on change for years. So I'm here as much to learn as I am to kind of moderate this panel. I think this is probably a great time to introduce everyone else who have far more interesting things to say than me. If you could just introduce yourselves, let us know what you do, maybe in the music industry, how you work for change. Just keep it kind of quick and snappy, and then we can dive into the real issues. Reed, did you maybe want to go first?
Sure. I was going to say I do have the first name alphabetically, but that's actually Tom. Anyway, yes, my name is Reed Blakely. I play in the bands The Plodes and The This, both with my good friend Evan Mathieson. And since last spring, I've been a member of the Union of Musicians and Allied Workers, or UMA for short, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing the interests of musicians and other workers within the music industry.
And how about Maggie? You're next on my screen. It's probably different for everyone.
Hi, I'm Maggie Vale. I run a record label for the band Bikini Kill. I am in a band called Hurry Up. I am on the board of an organization called the Artist Rights Alliance. Our mission statement is we are advocating for the rights of musicians, performers, and songwriters in the digital world. Not terribly dissimilar to what Reed's doing. We actually work together a lot. I worked at an independent record label before this. I guess Bikini Kills Records has been a label for 10 years, which I didn't realize until right before this started. But before that, I worked at Kill Rock Stars for nearly 18 years. I've been in the music industry since before streaming, since before computers, since we sent out new release faxes and like handwritten notes to everybody and vinyl records. So I've seen a lot of change. And I'm not being snappy, and I'm sorry. I also ran a nonprofit called Cash Music that built open source digital tools for artists. We are trying to get everything that you needed to build your own website and do directly any sort of commerce or fan-based stuff, everything we thought you should own. It was a brilliant idea, and during the Trump administration, everything kind of fell apart and there was no funding for that sort of thing anymore, but it was good while it lasted. And I guess that's it. Sorry, rambling.
All right. It's great. Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Beadham. I've been a freelance writer for 10 years or so. And around the start of the pandemic, I co-founded the New Feeling Co-op with a group of music journalists in so-called Canada, because we've seen our music media landscape kind of in a pronounced decline over the last decade. And the pandemic just kind of turned a downward slope into a cliff drop. Like we've seen a lot of publications slash their freelance budgets, let go of staff, or just like close regional offices. And like instead of working in these sort of atomized conditions, we wanted to create something that allowed us to lean on each other and our collective social capital. And that's how we kind of arrived at establishing New Feeling as a co-op.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to start, because I personally, I found the New Feeling, I was really inspired by it, because I feel like music writing in Canada, I felt that decline. And when I saw it pop up, it was like this, yes, you know, I was excited to see all these Canadian musicians kind of get the attention they deserved, and a lot of the issues that I thought weren't maybe being covered as in depth. And then it kind of went away. And I was worried about that, but it turned out that I was actually excited about the reason why. I was wondering if you could tell us about the journey of like doing, I think it was 2 issues, and then kind of pulling back and rejigging how you did New Feeling.
Yeah, so like sort of early on with New Feeling, there was like a lot of emphasis on editorial direction. I think because that's sort of what just comes like naturally to us as writers and editors, but also because it was important for us to kind of like demonstrate to our readership what we were going to be all about. And like the publication model that kind of like sticks to the news cycle was kind of like immediately disinteresting to us, because we knew it was unsustainable trying to compete with teams of full-time employees. And I know some of us are already pretty jaded with that world. So we decided like early on that we would try to operate as more of a magazine that kind of publishes a package of stories like once every 2 months or so. And from the start, it was just a labor of love. But we knew that operating that way was kind of a barrier to people's ability to participate in the co-op. So the idea was always that we would connect writers with material compensation for their labor somewhere down the road. And eventually we applied for a SOCAN grant and got pre-approval for funds that would allow us to pay for a full issue of content as we were kind of exploring them. And that was great, but we also knew that depending on grants is itself precarious, and that once we started paying for labor, it would be unacceptable to like ask others to do the same work for free. So at the end of 2020, we paused production so we could organize around like how we would open up membership, what different tiers of membership would look like, how dues would function, how we'd campaign around it, and things like this. And because we would be increasing our circle, it was also important for us to put a lot of work together towards a code of conduct, so that people knew what was expected of them as they were entering the co-op as members, and what they could expect from us. So that was eventually like authored in the lead up to our relaunch relaunch after we received some protective space training from Good Night Out Vancouver, which is a harm reduction organization in Vancouver nightlife. And after that, we relaunched this past August, and now we're in a place where our membership enrollment pays for a package of substantial articles every couple of months. It also helps us to like extend class solidarity. It gives us money to commission work from freelancers that aren't members of the co-op, and our membership is kind of growing naturally with the release of each issue. So we're sort of on track toward increasing our rates and our output, and we've only had to file one grant report.
I mean, to me, that's remarkable. Like, I think that's a success story, and I find it really inspiring. And I kind of wonder if maybe Reed and Maggie, if you could speak to, maybe we'll start with Reed. UMA has just a substantial number of steering committees looking at different issues in the music industry. I wonder if you could talk about those briefly, but maybe point out to keep on the inspirational train, like one that you feel like is making particular headway, hopefully, and maybe it would be fine too to bring up one that, you know, it's hitting a roadblock of some kind, and let us know what that is.
Sure. Yeah, so there are lots of subcommittees within UMOP dedicated to, you know, various issues. There's committees dedicated to getting fair deals with record labels, one's dedicated to touring internationally, dealing with venues to make sure shows are safe. We have groups dedicated to issues surrounding race and racism, gender and sexuality, neurodiversity, ableism, politics, economic issues, healthcare, self-accountability. Suffice it to say, we're trying to be a progressive and comprehensive organization. We're most well known for the Justice at Spotify campaign, which is the responsibility of the streaming committee, which I am on sometimes. I go to those meetings. And the streaming economy and all its ins and outs is by far the most talked about thing in the industry today, not just the recent news, but it's a hot button issue. People are starting to listen, including some lawmakers and major press outlets like the New York Times. We're getting a bit of attention, and yeah, that's the thing. Another committee of ours is the venues committee, and throughout last year, we were all collaborating on a big comprehensive list of demands and guidelines for COVID safety at shows as things were starting to open up. And we want to be prepared and say, this is what we think you need to run a safe show in these times. And it covered everything: masking, sanitation, testing, distancing, touring, ventilation, safety, even issues of staffing. And what some of us found in releasing the document and sharing it around was that following the guidelines was, suffice it to say, really, really hard and daunting. Running a venue is complicated and expensive enough when there isn't a potentially deadly airborne virus kicking around. And in some cases, venues would essentially be like, well, that's a nice list, but we're just going to follow the health authority in our jurisdiction and do what they say. It's what you would expect to happen, really. And I do want to shout out, though, being provincial here, because I am from Calgary, the Ship and Anchor venue in Calgary. They're continuing to go beyond what the laws in Calgary and Alberta say as far as safety for the sake of patrons and staff, and they've been getting a lot of flack for it, but it's very commendable. But in short, like, yeah, that's a success, and that's a bit of a, I wouldn't call it a roadblock. It's just like compared to the relative success of the Spotify campaign, it kind of pales in comparison, inevitably.
Yeah, and hurdle or roadblock might not be the right word, but, you know, there are the clear success in the ones that are like still building towards something, or learning moments, you know, of how you actually
There's just hurdles everywhere. It's the music industry.
There's exactly. Maggie, that makes me think too of, like, I mean, I feel like you could take this any number of a dozen different ways, but you know, your work at Bikini Kill Records, I think it probably contrasts pretty significantly with the way most major labels work with artists.
Oh yeah, I mean, they own their rights, and they just sort of hired me to oversee the label. So everything it's a collective, it's, you know, shared, and and they, you know, yeah, they own everything. And it's, in this day and age, it's extremely easy to do almost any sort of distribution on your own, right? Like we use TuneCore and we go through Discord in DC, because at one point the band was based in DC, so we fit into the parameters of a Discord situation. You know, I mean, that's also one of the benefits of like having been around a long time, right? Like I worked with Ian off and on throughout the years. And, you know, I mean, they're a legacy band, so they have their own, you know, there's a lot of things that are significantly easier for a band like Bikini Kill, right? It's like, well, they're going to make a Riot Girl playlist on, you know, Spotify, you know, they're going to be on it, you know, like things like that are just like, we don't have to worry about that sort of thing. But it's been, since they announced the reunion, which was 2019, right? And then they announced a full tour for 2020, which was obviously canceled. It was like 2 days before everything shut down. Was the first show was supposed to start, and they were like, yeah, we can't do this, we don't know what's going on. But between that, just the excitement of the reunion, you know, they had been asked for years if they wanted to play festivals, right? Like they've been approached by literally every festival you could think of saying, you know, will you reunite for this? And nobody's really offering them very much money. Like they knew what other people had been offered for those sorts of things, and they're like, okay, we're being, you know, we're not getting the sort of respect that we should be getting for who we are, probably because we're women again, you know, it's always been that sort of issue. And then they decided to just play their own shows on their own terms in Los Angeles, LA, and London, and sorry, not Los Angeles, LA, in Los Angeles, New York, and London. And it was crazy successful, and they were, you know, above and beyond what they were in the 90s. You know, I was like, oh, you guys have really like
you're going
dialed
places
this in, you know. But anyways, yeah, it's been kind of an exciting time period for them and for the label, even though, you know, the tours had to be rescheduled multiple times. It's supposed to start in April, you know, we'll see. But I was going to say, when you were talking about, Reed, when you were talking about, you know, the steering committees and things that you guys are working on over there, I wanted to touch in a little bit with the Artists' Rights Alliance. We are a US-based organization, and we do work very closely with lawmakers, and we are seeing a lot more understanding and excitement about artists' issues, and it's falling in line with like all of the things that are going on with workers' rights across the world, right? It's like there is this awareness that is bubbling to the surface, and for once, it seems like it's actually, you know, including musicians. Like it never did before. It was always like, oh, that's not real work, right? Like it was just kind of like, oh, you're lucky if you get to make money from this. It's not, oh, this company is, you know, paying this horrible person hundreds of millions of dollars to spread disinformation, but all the while, you know, the music has built this company up, right? And not gotten any of the of the sort of credit or the support that these other, you know, Joe Rogan obviously has received. And so I feel like the most exciting part of the moment right now is that is beginning to be understood. Like we are working with a lawmaker from Florida, Ted Deutsch, who introduced a bill called the Protect the Working Musicians Act. And here in the US, musicians cannot collectively bargain with digital outlets. It's actually like an antitrust issue. So we have to get a law passed saying we are allowed to do this so that we can, you know, say no to these licenses that are completely unfair and collectively bargain together. There was a law passed recently that allowed journalists to do the same thing. We're sort of piggybacking on that language a little bit. But there does seem to be some excitement about it, and we'll see where it goes. But
yeah, I it's something that I feel like I've if I'm being totally honest, it's been the previous few years have been a bit difficult. Like it felt like it was constantly fighting the same battles, and only in the last 2 years has it really felt like the conversation has switched a little bit to kind of respect musicians and the work musicians do, and all music industry workers, you know, sound technicians and whatever. And so I guess it kind of makes me think of two things. One is, do y'all think that the pandemic amplified that, like when musicians literally couldn't work in the way they always had, or music industry workers? And then also a common theme I see amongst, I think, everyone, is that musicians and like the content creators, the journalists, are centered in the trying to change. Like they are the ones part of the steering committees, they're unionizing, or they're working together, or they're forming co-ops. So how much do you think that pandemic piece is important, or is it just coincidental? And how important do you think it is that musicians are coming together themselves?
I think that the pandemic really sort of shone a light on the discrepancies of capitalism in our modern world. Like it just really has sort of raised this awareness. And I just think it's finally, people are understanding that, you know, this is a job and this is work. And there are many pieces of the puzzle. You know, I think maybe a year into the pandemic, when there wasn't any relief yet here in the US, like we, you know, it was just like, we were all sort of waiting for this bill to get passed, and it was not getting passed in the Senate. And there was I just sort of talked about what's going on with live music, and what's going on with venues, and what's going on with record stores, and what's going on with musicians. And my tweet kind of went viral and I actually got scared because I don't like that much attention online. I was like, oh no. But you know, it resonated with a lot of people. Like there was just like, oh, right. All the people that work there, all the people that do sound there, all like, we couldn't go to work, you know, and there was, in the US at least, I know you guys have a different situation, but like there was nothing for us for the longest time. And it, you know, I think between that and the Justice at Spotify campaign, which has been incredible, I think those two things together have finally sort of clicked for people, you know, just the reality of our modern world is unsustainable.
Yeah. And Reed, do you think, like, so like when I read UMA's kind of vision and I look into the steering committees, it all resonates with me. Like I'm a music industry worker, I'm also a musician. I feel like part of the reason it resonates so strongly is because I recognize so many of the names on the steering committees as musicians or people who actually work in the industry. Like, do you find that there's been greater support for you because it's coming from you and not from like a provincial or municipal bureaucrat saying, how are we going to save this, or how are we going to change this? It's people who are on the ground level.
Yeah, I think so. Like there are some like names that, you know, at least music geeks would recognize on the steering committee, like prominent, well, not on the steering committee anymore, but a prominent member of the streaming committee is Damon Kurkowski, drummer of Galaxy 500. Got members of Downtown Boys, who are a bit of a happening band these days. But I think, yeah, the fact that it is like very much, it's for musicians, by musicians, and also allied workers, don't forget them. You know, people who work in venues, people who work at labels, but don't necessarily do the making music part. But yeah, because it's coming from them and we're kind of in the driver's seat of what we want to talk about and do, like people are responding to that. Like it's not some, you know, local politician going up on a podium and saying like music is very important to our community. As true as that is, like it can sound disingenuous, especially when, like, you know, again and again and again, like, well, it's like, well, you say these things to the press and to the public, but what are you actually doing for us? Like, how is this, like, you know, public initiative or, you know, or big private initiative, how is it actually benefiting those on the lowest rungs. Now, I don't like to think of rungs, but lowest rungs of the music industry, like the grassroots DIY stuff that I came up from. I'm sure all of us came up from.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think that's what people are responding to. Yeah.
Yeah, and Tom, like yourself too, this is my perspective. I don't know if it's true, but my perspective is New Feeling has really kind of like grabbed people's attention, at least in my circles. And I feel like a lot of it is because either the articles are being written by musicians or people who have been like really entrenched in the Canadian music industry, or they're just highlighting issues that are important to musicians. I don't know if that's intentional, if it's not, if you agree, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think we've been like pretty intentional about doing the work that we don't necessarily see happening in the more like traditional publications. And like I've personally had people come up to me at like the couple of shows that I did manage to make it out to in the like little bubble of activity that we had in September in Toronto, that were like really excited about the stuff that we were doing, which was great. And we're also like, it's been nice to see like some of the articles that we've published recognized and sort of like best music writing in Canada for the year kind of things, the list that Del Cowie puts together every year. But yeah, I think getting back to the idea of like whether or not this could have happened at the scale that it's happening in the pandemic, like none of us like would have had the energy or the time to sort of organize around something like this if we weren't like if we were still at our day jobs and things like this. Like there isn't a lot of opportunity to be a music writer only in Canadian media if without a day job. So that extra time just kind of afforded us more ability to organize and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that's a perfect segue, because my next question, and anyone's welcome to jump in to answer, is like the balance of, because it seems like a lot of the power of all of the work that's being done by you, like the three of you, is the centering of musicians or music writers. But I wonder about that balance of like the common story we've heard all week is like how much is being dumped on musicians' plates. Like they're already writing and recording albums. These days, you become your own publicist, you make your own video, you manage your social media account, you know, set up your distribution. I just wonder, like, I'd love to hear your insight on if that's like, if you think that's just how it has to be, because only musicians can kind of lead this conversation, or if there is something some way we can kind of balance this for them so that, you know, there's not like, oh, here, now fix it, you yourself fix it again. And anyone feel free to jump in. Or I'll call you up.
I don't see any reason why musicians have to sort of take this on all by themselves. Like I think music writers are uniquely positioned to advocate for musicians right now. Like they have access to the platforms that fans go to for updates on the artists that they love. And of course, editors have even more opportunity there. I also think that like local government needs to get involved. They can have a direct say in things like protecting venues. And I know writers like Liz Pelly have also talked a lot about the way that municipal streaming resources that are starting to spring up out of libraries can help artists. But I also think we need to see solidarity from other creative sectors where laborers like have traditionally been more successful in advocating for themselves. Like thinking specifically about the film industry, Like when you think about how like the big three record labels, like Warner, Universal, and Sony, I do have to imagine like there are some learning opportunities available, and I'd be curious, like if Reader Maggie can tell us about any support that like maybe they've seen from organizers in film too.
There's a little from time to time, like there'll be things here in the US, like bills or initiatives that I'll be working on that we'll work on with SAG-AFTRA or something, that just sort of fall right in line, same sort of things. I mean, it's just freelance work, a lot of those things, overlap. But I think a lot about how the studio has reacted to streaming services in such a different way than music labels did here. Like I worked at Kill Rock Stars up until right before Spotify came to the US, and the anxiety that everyone was feeling before they came here was like insane. Everyone was, these negotiations were going on and no one knew what the rates were going to be. And it just felt like this doom, like this kind of like this feeling of like, oh, we can't do anything about it. It's coming. It's going to be terrible. Do you know what I mean? And I just kept thinking, we're the ones that have the music. Like, why do we feel like this? Like, we don't have to do this thing. It's like, I think in a lot of ways, many of us would have preferred people to just, steal music and then purchase albums when they want it. Do you know what I mean? Like, there was just really like it just felt so strange to me. And that was actually why I started working on Cash, because I was like, I don't want to feel like I'm kind of rolling over, like, and just, waiting for this inevitable thing. I want to try to build something that actually works for musicians. And I think, the reality is nothing works for every musician, right? It's like nobody has the same career, nobody has the same goals, nobody has the same fan base. And so there has to be this flexibility to it, right? It's like you have to remember that, what works for one musician isn't going to work for another. But underlying all of it are the same kinds of battles, So it's just like, I don't know. It was really ambitious and maybe a little bit ahead of its time. Like we tried to explain why it would be necessary, and everyone's like, "Oh, Facebook is great. We reach our fans that way." And we're like, "No, really, it's not." Like, this is not going to end well. And then, like, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, everyone was like, "Oh, yes, this is why this is necessary." But yeah, I'm really excited about the municipal, like what Liz has been writing about. I think that could be quite interesting. And there's solutions coming. There's creative solutions coming. I'm not sure exactly what will work or what will pan out or not, but it feels like the conversation has actually changed or is in the process of changing.
Yeah, it's interesting mentioning the like allying with film workers, because there already is a crossover with like film and the music world in a way that a lot of people don't realize. IATSE, the main union for people who work on film sets, that's also the union that more often than not, represents stage techs and people who work at live events. Yeah, because that's I think the S in that abbreviation, I can't remember the content of the acronym, but it stands for stage. And yeah, it's people on film sets, it's people who work in theaters or at concert venues, and that's how it started, and it's been around for a long time. So we're natural, as far as I see it, we're natural allies. But going back to the original question, musicians being in the driver's seat, I think it's a bit of column A, bit of column B. I think musicians themselves need to, like, nobody's an island and nobody should be expected to be a total polymath or Renaissance person, but at the same time, like, I think we should be in the driver's seat, like, more than ever before, because when big companies are making the lion's share of the money off of our work, we're pissed off. But if we do the exact same thing just on our own terms, we're fine with it, because it's us calling the shots. And that's the whole point of unionization, is it's doing the same job, producing the same things, performing the same service, but more on our terms. A platform, for example, that works the exact same as Spotify, but is run by musicians with the interests of musicians and music fans in mind would not be a problem, because the whole reason we record our music is so other people can hear it. And a platform where you can listen to virtually any song you want at the click of a button is great. We all use it. We all use Spotify. We all use YouTube, Tidal, whichever. We all used Napster 20-something years ago. And the issue is that Spotify and any of these other streaming services, it's not run by musicians or even with musicians in mind. There's an executive at Spotify, one of the co-founders, he admitted at a music conference that this is the case. Like, we didn't make Spotify to make musicians money. We made it to make ourselves money with music. And I don't want to advertise too much because but a platform does exist actually. It's a musician-owned streaming service called Resonate that you can Google, and it is actually much like New Feeling, a worker cooperative. If you sign on, you're like a part of the company, and you have a say in what goes on this streaming platform. And also, speaking to Tom, you mentioned local government getting involved. I think it was Liz Pelly that wrote an article a while back about an attempt by actually the UMass Chicago chapter to try and create a streaming service for the Chicago Public Library, or that was based within the Chicago Public Library. And that's actually a thing that exists all over, because the library is a function of local government, and there are library systems all over North America that run their own music streaming services dedicated to local artists, one of them being Edmonton, Alberta, another one being Seattle, another one being Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And the code to run a basic streaming service, you can get it for free on GitHub, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, and also libraries themselves. That's how both my dad and I grew up getting new music. We would go to the library and get CDs and burn copies, and yeah, that's how we would discover a lot of stuff. And Calgary, for example, could easily do something like this. As Calgary Public Library could assemble a consortium of folks from CJSW, CKUA, Sled, Jazz YYC, whichever, and put together a publicly funded streaming service where the artists get paid. And that's, and it just takes initiative. But yeah, it has to be on above all musicians and music fans who are often one and the same on their terms.
Oh. Yeah.
Wait, I want to interject real quick.
Yeah.
I just want to talk about the impact of Bandcamp Friday, because
yeah.
I think it was massive. I think that and Justice at Spotify, those two things really were like, oh, this is a great platform. This is a way to, give people as much money as possible directly. Or I loved when people started raising funds for other things, that were like, oh, well, we'll donate the money that, Bandcamp would have made to, this abortion fund organization in, Texas or whatever. It's been brilliant. And I love that they brought it back for another 5 months or whatever. Yeah. But even moving forward, if they did it like once or twice a year, it would, I think kind of continue that sort of excitement. It's like people have threads of just like, oh, what did you get? Like, tell me more. And then retweeting everybody's Bandcamp Friday purchases. And, I love it. I love that excitement of like, we couldn't go to a record store for 2 years, but we had this,
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many things that tie back to some of the earlier panels we had this week, like the Bandcamp Friday thing, that we had a panel on the virtual event kind of boom that happened over the pandemic. And a musician, Paper Beat Scissors, was talking about how his experience was that there were people out there that like exactly that. They wanted to give them money. They had disposable income. They just lost their usual means to do so. And so the virtual events were just a way for him to for people to find that way, like, here's your money. And same with Bandcamp Friday. Was most of the people who stream, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of people who stream on Spotify, I think, it's not that they don't want musicians to get paid. They just, the most convenient way for them to stream music doesn't have an easy outlet for them to then support musicians. And yeah, I think it's fascinating. And then coming back to something you said, Tom, of like learning from other industries, we actually also had a panel on, it was both CARFAC and the CFM, I think that's the abbreviation, the Canadian Federation of Musicians, basically like a union. And CARFAC has released, like they've been really successful. They had released a kind of minimum standard fee schedule for visual artists, whether they were exhibiting, doing speaker fees, et cetera, digital events. And they've kind of been just widely accepted. Like you can't pay artists less than that. And the Canadian Federation of Musicians has a minimum fee schedule, but they don't actually publicize it anywhere. And so my experience has been that it hasn't been picked up as kind of like an accepted minimum. And that like learning of looking at what CARFAC was able to do, of visual artists actually tend to get paid in Canada and musicians tend to not get paid what they deserve. And you know, I know that both as a musician, as someone paying musicians, and it was fascinating just to see that kind of like disconnect of there's someone who did it, they were successful, and there's this other organization that, you know, not to be negative or anything, but I think there's a learning moment there of how we could actually collectively move towards some change, at least in that realm. I want to move on a little bit to it's kind of been mentioned a few times, like Discord. There's been conversations of like musicians from across North America working on the same steering committee. And I just want to talk about like some of the strategies, some of the tools used to actually collectively come together on some of these issues we're talking about, using those digital tools, like what you found has been successful. Is it actually better than pre-digital times because you can connect with people from around the world and learn, you know, whatever. I don't know if Reed, maybe you'd be a good place to start, just with the breadth of steering committees and people from all over.
Yeah, well, you know, apart from like, you know, the occasional like meeting of a local or something like that, like, or an in-person action, like almost all UMA business or meetings, the meeting part at least, is conducted over Zoom, exactly what we're doing right now. And we all got very used to using Zoom pretty quickly over the course of the pandemic. And yeah, that's like, I'm one of the only like kind of active members who lives where I live. I live in Victoria, BC. There's like, I'm talking to people in New York, in Los Angeles, wherever, like, you know, several times a week. And you know, it's just a normal part of our lives right now, this video conferencing thing, this kind of Star Trek stuff, really. And you know, we collaborate on documents just over Google Drive, like in real time. And we communicate mostly over email and in group chats and stuff like that. And it's, you know, there's little things that we wish each of these platforms did differently, but you know, we're using just kind of the basic stuff that everybody's using these days. It's just kind of fully integrated in our lives. And then for actual like organization as an organization, like sending out emails to members or potential members and everything, memos, we're using the Action Network platform, which I understand is, I almost said industry standard, but it's not really an industry, the activism industry. But yeah, that's what we're doing. We're using the same technology, nothing fancy really, just the same technology that everybody around us is using.
And Maggie, I think you had mentioned Discord, but I also think this ties into like your work with Cash Music and the not reliance, but the focus on open source tools, like things that didn't exist 20 years ago that have the power to empower musicians. I mean,
everything is different than 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I think a lot about, you know, the sort of promise of the internet, right? It was like, well, first it started off as AOL, and then first it didn't start off as AOL, but for most people who use the internet, like back then, you know, it was it's kind of esoteric until that happened, right? And then it felt like, oh, things are going to be sort of, you know, why can't I think of the right word? Like not just like distributed, like pushed out across the internet. There's all these places to go. There's all these ways to be creative. And then it just got more and more and more consolidated, right? But it does feel like, you know, with all these different tools, with these different ways of communication, I mean, things get, you know, swooped up so quickly. It's kind of unfortunate. It's like, you know, I, for some reason, can't remember what, do Facebook own? It's not Signal, it's the other one. WhatsApp, right? Yeah, you know, it's like, I don't know. There's all these possibilities, right? There's all these ways to reach people that we couldn't do before. And some of that has led to like organizing, some has led to awareness, some has led to consolidation, some, you know, it's a mixed bag. But I do think that we are going to move eventually. It might get weird before we get there, but towards a place of equity, of transparency. You know, here in the US, the Federal Trade Commission is actually, I've been having meetings with a couple of people who are on that, and they're interested in what's going on with musicians. They're interested in monopolies and breaking up some of what's happening. Like we actually were talking to them about Spotify discovery mode, because it's essentially payola. I don't know if you guys are aware of what it is, but Spotify is allowing you to choose to get half of your regular royalty rate for extra promo. The idea is that you would be put on these playlists that would come up naturally at the end of like somebody's listening to something that sort of sounds like you, then there'd be this, you know, Spotify discovery playlist that would like list your band, right? So the idea is you're paying for this sort of placement, but there's a lot of really potentially illegal things happening there, right? It's like one, Spotify are telling people that there's a no ad service, so when, or a no ad tier. So like when people are paying for the service, they're not supposed to be getting ads, but this is clearly an ad. It's one of those things where they just did this, like, it was, I'm so sorry that my brain is a little scattered today, but they did a trial period, right? They asked all these artists to try it out, and they're like, look how successful it was. But if everyone's doing it, then it doesn't mean anything, right? It's like, then everyone's in the same pool and no one's going to see any effect, and you get half of the terrible revenue you got before. You know, it's I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know why I ended up on the FTC when we were talking about monopolies, but they were really interested in talking about breaking up Amazon, or, you know, and Facebook and all of these things that are going on. I do think something will change pretty fundamentally.
Yeah. And I think it's natural. Like every conversation I have eventually leads to Spotify or Amazon. Right. And I think they represent so many of the hot button issues. Like,
you know, and we shouldn't forget Google and YouTube.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's pretty miserable too.
Yeah. These kind of like the promise of this amazing thing, and you can reach anyone, with the downside of actually, you know, you wished for a million wishes kind of thing. And it went wrong.
For a brief period, we were funded by Google, actually, when they were supporting open source platforms. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh no, we don't like open source anymore.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I was like, well, that's fine. I mean, you know, it was a no strings attached grant, so it was totally fine with us, but it was, I think at that point it was a natural, like, okay, yeah, we don't want to have anything to do with you anyways.
Yeah.
It was
telling.
Yeah.
And Tom, do you think, I guess both from a organizational standpoint and editorial, like, do you think New Feeling could exist without living in a time of digital tools and email and being able to kind of collaborate cross country so quickly?
Yeah. I think like jumping to like organizing over Discord felt like relatively natural for all of us, just because like we all come from freelance backgrounds, so we're used to like sending a message whenever we want to write an article or need to get something done. But yeah, I don't know that we would have connected with writers across the country. Like most of us that co-founded it, at least, were Toronto based. But I don't know that we would have connected with some of our BC members or people out on the East Coast if we didn't have Twitter to connect with people. Yeah, and for the most part, I found like using Discord as like a digital office, digital office space has kind of worked out well for us because it kind of helps us like manage the different things that are all happening at the same time, and it unclutters our emails. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm generally positive about it.
Nice. I was thinking I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I feel like we could literally talk for another 2 hours. But I was thinking of kind of wrapping this up with, I mean, if anyone has questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. But I was thinking of wrapping it up with a couple of kind of quick fire questions for everyone, if you're game for that, just like 2 or 3. So one is just, I want to touch on the idea of mentorship. Like there's a tremendous amount of really good insight that everyone has here. And I just want to know what's everyone's thoughts on how we can ensure that, you know, this isn't stuck to one person, that it gets passed on so that we're constantly improving. And you can talk about it in your own kind of lanes, if you will. Tom, do you want to go first? You seem pensive.
I think I'm still processing.
Fair enough.
Not ready for a rapid fire.
Any mentorship thoughts on the Reed or Maggie side of things, or just sharing of information in general?
I think, I mean, I'm a big proponent of having a mentor or helping out wherever possible, right? It's like, that was kind of part of the Cash stuff too, was like, we had this blog called Watt that was all education. Actually, Liz, but she and I worked on a lot of stories about Spotify there. But yeah, I've had mentors my whole career. I've had one in particular, Molly Newman, who was the drummer in Brahmobile, who now is the president of Song Trust. But she's, you know, done a million things along the way, but always a few years older than me and a little bit always more further in her career. You know, I think people should and can reach out whenever they need it. You know, it's like, I like it when people ask me for advice. And, you know, the few times that I've reached out and done it, it's always been a positive experience. You know, I think recognizing that we're all kind of in this because we like community is important. You know, it's pretty rare that we, you know, we'll just, someone's asking me a question, of course I'm going to tell them, you know, like, this is how I do it. I don't know if it'll work for you, you know, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Reed, I like, in looking at UMA's website, like there's some great resources that are shared that, for me at least, my entire life in the music industry, like I didn't have access to that kind of information on things to know about signing a record contract or, you know, approaching certain deals. Is that mentorship like built into the way the steering committees work or the way the organization is like organized?
Sort of. There's a built-in, like the steering committee is an elected, a mixture of elections and appointments, and it's like a 1-year turnover. So that helps keep things fresh. But yeah, there's just like kind of, it's very, it's less about like, you know, mentorship and more about horizontality. Like it's just a very horizontal organization. Like there's no head of UMA, like there's the head of, like there would be the head of the Teamsters Union, for example. And also we are far less likely to be buried under a football stadium. But I think that's what's important is like, you know, there's sort of an inherent, like mentorship is like, it's more of a, I think the lack of strict hierarchy is important in this. Like like, because that just creates like barriers to entry, and that creates gatekeeping. you know, taking off my Yuma hat and putting on my like Reed hat. You know, growing up in the like I was involved in the indie music scene in Calgary from like the late like 2008-ish on, when I was like 15, 16 years old. And, you know, I got a hell of a lot of mentorship from just people who were just putting on shows and playing in bands in and around that. Sean, I sure we know a lot of the same people. And also volunteering at CGSW, the university radio station there. Like, it's just like creating a community where, and like, you know, I'm stammering a bit, I apologize, but you know, I'm a 15-year-old kid just waltzing into a university radio station, be like, hi, can I do stuff? And they were just like, yeah, with that attitude, sure you can. And that is, we need that in like all aspects of the music industry. And that, whether we call that mentorship, whether we just call that fostering a community, that's important. And one of the pitfalls that we have to avoid as far as building community is making sure that there is turnover, and that there is like you know, that there isn't like isn't as much of an ebb and flow where, like, you know, because like another thing I experienced in the Calgary indie music scene of that kind of era is that like so many people, there was like over the couple of years, mass exodus out to like mostly Montreal, a little bit of Vancouver, a little bit of Toronto, and then, you know, things just kind of deflate a little bit, and then you have to wait for, you know, some more teenagers to grow up or more people to move in and go there for college or something like that for there to be a scene again. And the in-between eras can kind of suck. And that needs to be, and, you know, that can also be informed by, like, you know, a lack of educational or economic opportunity in whatever town or city this is. And as things get more and more unaffordable for like everybody, that risks happening. You know, there can be a mass exodus where nobody even leaves town. And that's that I think is something that we need to be aware of. But yeah, mentorship and horizontality.
I call that the worst sports trade, or the worst trade ever, because I moved from Montreal to Calgary like 2007, the very same year that all the bands that I loved from Calgary, like I discovered, moved to Montreal. So it's like Calgary got me and Montreal got like a dozen amazing bands. It just didn't work out for Calgary. Tom, have you thought?
Yeah, I know how to answer the question now. Yeah, with New Feeling, I can sort of really relate to that idea of coinciding horizontality and mentorship. It's sort of built into the way that we organize our working groups. So the way our working groups function, we have a person that's established as sort of a team lead for the idea is that they'll rotate out of that position biannually. So every year we'll have 2 team leads. And the idea there is, as new people come in, there is enough like institutional knowledge that is left over to kind of like pass that on to the next team lead.
No, I think that's key, and that's something a lot of organizations, like even on our level, like our level is the wrong word, but like the amount of time we've existed, we struggle with that too, like the institutional knowledge, and how do you capture it and make it shareable. So I think that's a really smart point. As we wrap this up, I was thinking that like I said, I think we could have talked for another hour, maybe on Spotify alone. But I was thinking if we could just kind of leave everyone in watching with maybe 2 things. Like if there's anything you think we missed out that's really worth bringing up, or something you're hopeful for. And then I think what's really important is that a lot of the organizations you're involved in, like if people are inspired, how can they get involved? Like whether it's spreading the message or actually getting involved in your organization. So is there any kind of like final thought, and how can they get involved? And maybe we'll start with Maggie to change it up.
Hi. for the ARA, we have a music council, we have newsletters, all that sort of stuff. You go to the website, sign up, and it's mostly at this point, there's opportunities to help spread the word about these bills that we're working on. We've tried to do message boards. Like we kind of had like John McCrae, who's one of the board members, he's got this, like he really wants us, and I think it's right on, to get a message board that's just for musicians, where you can go and say, hey, has anyone worked with this label before? What was your experience? Or like, hey, what are you guys doing about your COVID sort of stuff or whatever? So that's coming. I think it's just figuring out which tool to use to build it. But yeah, I think I lost my train of thought. I was reading the question over here. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody said something.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a positive comment of like, it's just so refreshing. And I guess the downside is the fact that it is refreshing, but the comment was that it's so refreshing to see all these, conversations about tech and digital tools that are actually about humans first.
Yeah.
Like, and I do think that is a really positive, like that might be the hopeful thing that I was asking about is it seems like that's the change. That's the difference from a Spotify. Is this actually conversations about humans first? Reed, you want to answer in? How can people get involved? Is there anything you think we missed out on that can be?
Sure. Yeah. Well, to learn more about UMA, we're called the Union of Musicians and Allied Workers. I must emphasize, I should have beforehand, that we are not technically a labor union or trade union. We're largely due to our capabilities and also legal technicalities in the state of New York. So we're not like a trade union. But we call ourselves that. And our website is unionofmusicians.org. Union of Musicians is all one word. And we have new member meetings once a month where you can just sign up right now on the website and you can attend a new member meeting. I will find out when the next one is in a bit while I vamp. And yeah, it's really fun. You get to meet people, you get to talk about things that you didn't think could get talked about, or you maybe didn't know other people were thinking about. I'll give you an example. So actually another member, there's another Calgarian or former Calgarian member of UMA named Sydney Koch. She's on the steering committee. She played in the band The Courtneys. And we got to talking when we both joined UMA about how expensive it is for a Canadian band to get a touring visa to play even one show legally in the United States. It's absolutely ridiculous. If you don't know, like for a 3-piece band touring around in a minivan, even with no support crew, it's up to $1,000. And a lot of these,
insane.
Yeah, a lot of these DIY punk bands don't have $1,000 to throw around easily, especially not if they make minimum wage, which they often do. And so we formed a subcommittee dedicated to that. And that's like, I was always thinking like, oh, we won't be able to tour the States in any of my bands until we like raise enough money to like, get a visa and then months and months in advance prepare a whole thing to make it worth it. And turns out there's other people who are concerned about the same things as you. And that's the great thing about joining a union. That's the great thing about joining any kind of advocacy organization like this, is like it shows you that there's a way, that there is a way, or there could be a way if you forge it.
Yeah, I was going to say we can follow up because we'll save the chat. All these videos will be archived, and we'll make sure that in the description you include all the relevant links to your organizations, how to get involved, etc. So if it times out well with the next meeting, perfect, and if it doesn't, for the next one.
To avoid you just witnessing me scrolling through my phone, sign up if you want to become a member. It's free for the time being at unionofmusicians.org, and then you should be getting an email. You should start getting emails about the kind of stuff we're doing right there.
And Tom, how can people get involved, and are you hopeful about anything?
I'm generally a hopeful person, I think. but people can get involved with New Feeling either by going to our website and going to our Become a Member page. I'll just drop that into the chat. But yeah, if they're interested in what we're doing, they can just go to our website, newfeeling.ca. We're on social media, like at Instagram and Twitter at New Feeling Co-op. And yeah, if they don't have money to put towards music journalism, that's cool. If they can let a friend know what we're doing, that's also great.
It's awesome. Well, to wrap it up, this is kind of my summation. You might disagree, but I feel like my takeaways are whatever you're struggling with, there's probably thousands of other people thinking about the same issue. There are ways, if you want to get involved in changing it, there are ways to do so through the organizations we've talked to today and through others. And I guess also just that, like, it feels, at least to me, and it seems like it's been a constant message here too, that like this is a good time for change to happen. Like there's a spotlight on musicians, musician rights, just general kind of like worker issues, that it actually feels for the first time in a while like things could change. And that it seems like to me that the important things are that artists and content creators, if you want to call them that, are involved in that decision making. There's transparency around how the change is being made and how the models are being remodeled, and that there's a sharing of knowledge and of tools to make those changes happen. And you know, that goes from the Cache Music open source tools to the resources on your website, Reed, UMA's website, to New Feelings. Like just every issue shines a light on a new issue hitting the industry. And I think all of those things together kind of work together to hopefully make some positive change. That's going to be my little ending, to try and end on a little inspirational note. I just want to thank everyone here for taking part, sharing your insights. I feel inspired. I hope other people do. But also I just have a ton of new knowledge in my head. So I know I'm going to get involved in some new things. And just in general, for the week of panels we've had so far, this is the last one. Thank you to the 500 plus registrants. Thank you to our funders. Thank you for everyone who's tuned in. Just keep a lookout for Sled Island socials, Byta socials. We'll be sharing all these videos again in edited form to be a little snappier and look a little better. But all this info will be shared, and we'll make sure that all of the relevant links are included too, just in that same interest of sharing and transparency. Thank you so much. And this is my awkward sign off where we wait for this to close.